What's up, speech class? Welcome to week 6. We've talked about storytelling. We've gone through 5 weeks of storytelling. Hopefully, the process of telling your story felt natural and it felt like something that you would want to do again, depending on the situation. I understand. Your stories are powerful. That's the main takeaway. Your story has the ability to encourage, inspire, challenge, and your story is unique to you. But even though it is unique to you, it is universal because even though somebody may not have um, gone through the same specific thing as you, the emotions that you endure going through that specific thing are universal. Confusion, anxiety, worry, fear, um, grief, all of these things are human issues. So your story really speaks to what it means to be human and the human condition. And by telling it, it can make people feel less alone, make them feel a little bit more empowered that things will eventually be okay. So, just want to encourage you, look for opportunities to tell your story, and not just one story of your life, but as many stories as you feel comfortable telling. So we're transitioning for the next few weeks into nonverbal communication. And nonverbal communication is um, all of the communication that isn't verbal. And so I'm sure you guys are aware that many times what your body is saying, what your face is saying, uh, is actually louder than what your actual words are saying. So when we talk about nonverbal communication, what we're talking about is facial expressions, body language, gestures, tone, which is how you speak the word you're speaking, space, things of this nature. And so there's a thing called Meridian's rule that says that 55% of your communication is actually nonverbal. It's just your body language, and that 38% of your communication is the tone. That's how you're saying specific words. So leaving only really about 7% that is verbal. So that means that about 93% of your communication is happening through nonverbal channels. And this is powerful. And so nonverbal communication really can do one of three things, okay? It can reinforce what you're saying, meaning strengthen it, It can contradict what you're saying, meaning be the opposite of what you're saying, or it can replace altogether what you're saying, okay? So for instance, if somebody were to ask me if I'm okay, are you okay? And I go, I'm fine. And I cross my arms and I look away and I'm fine. I'm okay. Are you receiving? What message are you receiving? Probably that I'm not okay, right? Even though I said I was okay, but my body language, the tone in which I said it, not okay, right? And so think about the last time you've done this when somebody's asked you, how are you? And you've said you're fine, which you really weren't. In fact, you were the opposite of fine. Your body language probably communicated that to the person who you were speaking to. So this is really powerful because really our body language, our facial expressions, our gestures, the way we say things, if we really want to encourage people and we want to be clear with our communication, we have to be just as careful about our nonverbal cues as we do our verbal words. Okay, because we got to make sure they're aligning, that they're saying the same thing. And so when they do that, it helps build credibility. Okay, like it helps us build credibility, which is build trust with people. All right, and help people feel connected to us when my body, my gestures, my tone, and my words are all aligned in communicating the same message. That creates connection, and it creates credibility, and it makes people feel more comfortable engaging with us. Okay, and what all of this does is it really amplifies our words. So remember, your words are just about 7 to 10% of what you're communicating. If your body and your tone can support that 7 to 10%, then it amplifies your communication, makes it even stronger, right? It makes it even more powerful. It increases conviction in your words, and it makes you feel more authentic, because anybody can say what they want. But if their body and their tone and their gestures and their eyes and their smiles, those things don't connect and align with what they're saying, then it's really difficult to trust somebody. Um, we don't believe them, right? We don't believe what they're saying. And so we want to be careful. So remember, your nonverbal cues will either reinforce, meaning strengthen your verbal communication, they'll contradict your verbal communication, or they'll altogether replace your verbal communication. Those got to be careful. We want to always reinforce our verbal communication. All right. So there's really about really 5 types of when we're talking about nonverbal communication. There's 5 elements essentially of nonverbal communication. And the first one is kinesics. All right. Kinesics. Kinesics, if you've ever heard of the word kinesiology, then you're familiar with this. Has to do with body movements, what we're doing with our face, our gestures, our posture and stance, how we're standing, making sure that we're not crossing our arms, making sure that we're not holding our fists together, making sure that our face is reinforcing and reflecting what we're talking about. If I'm trying to be positive and upbeat, that my eyes are open and that I'm kind of wearing a slight smile, and that my tone is kind of matching, or if I am talking about something really serious, I slow down and my face reflects it. Maybe my brow is furrowed a little bit and I'm making more eye contact. I'm trying to connect with you on some deeper level here. So got to be aware of our body movements. That's what kinesics is our body movements in relation to our nonverbal communication. All right, the second one, oculesics, Oculesics, oculesics. This is eye contact, all right? This is realizing that eye contact fosters connection, not too much eye contact. Because if I spend too much time looking right at you, it makes people uncomfortable. But I make eye contact. I establish it at the beginning of a conversation, and then maybe look away, come back to it, look away, come back to it, right? We establish eye contact and keep establishing it based on the comfortability of the person we're speaking with, right? Scanning the room, engaging in different pieces, different sections of the audience. If you are speaking to an audience, being aware that you're making eye contact with more than one person, because everybody's looking at you. You want to make eye contact with as many people as you can. Eye contact is really, really powerful. It can make a conversation feel really intimate and intense. And there are times, depending on what the conversation is about, depending on what you're communicating, there are moments when more eye contact is okay and when less is okay. But we always want to make sure that we are making eye contact with people that we're communicating with. And listen, some of this requires nuance, because there may be times we're communicating with someone where it's obvious that too much eye contact makes them uncomfortable. So be aware of who you're speaking to and how much eye contact they're comfortable with. If they're holding your eye contact, it's okay to hold it back. But if they're looking away, and then you can kind of establish it look away, establish it, look away. So be aware of what you're doing with your eyes, because too little eye contact feels like somebody you can't trust. Too much feels a little bit too intense. And so I think this is one of those things where we establish it in the beginning, and based on the comfortability of who we're speaking to or who we're communicating with, we kind of go from there. All right. The third thing is proxemics. All right. Proxemics. Proxemics. Maybe a word that sounds familiar is proximity, which has to do with space. And if that's what you thought, then congratulations. Personal space is different for everyone, right? Some people want more space than others, but spacing in communication. So if we're talking about small group communication or one-on-one, spacing is very, very important. All right. If it's the less space there is, the more intimate the conversation is, and we're creating a sense of intimacy and connectivity there. If there's a little bit less space there, or if there's more space, then the conversation is less formal. And this is another one of those opportunities where we have to just be aware of our surroundings. What kind of space are we creating? Now, if you're speaking to an audience, spaces has more to do with movement, how you're moving in that space from side to side, right? How you're moving from each place of the stage. New speakers tend to do one of two things when they're speaking in front of a crowd for the first time. They either stand completely still or they move aimlessly. They kind of pace. So be careful about how much movement you have if you are speaking publicly. Don't stand in one place, but don't just aimlessly walk around. Move from side to side of the crowd. And if you're going to move, make sure you're moving your eyes as well. And your movement should be to present yourself to different parts of the crowd. All right. The fourth thing is vocalics. 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 This is vocal elements like tone and pitch and volume and pauses. All of these things are about how you sound and how you're using your words. So these are all nonverbal, even though they are about sound, but it's how we're using those words. Remember back in week 1 and week 2, we talked about sound as language, sound as communication, that words are primarily just sounds. And so how we speak the words, the volume, the tone, the pitch, and even the speed at which we speak. And sometimes we might want to pause for effect. This allows people to catch up and think deeply about what we're saying. And if I'm speaking really loudly, I'm excited and I'm trying to bring you into this passion. But if I slow down and I begin to speak with a lower voice, I'm causing the audience to kind of pull in towards me. I'm signifying to the other person that what I'm saying right now has deeper meaning to me than if I were speaking it really quickly and going on and on and on. So how you speak the words says a lot about what you're communicating to other people. And I think a lot of these things are things that we do pretty well, that are subconscious. But the reality is, especially depending on what year you were born, for those of you born after the year 2000, you grew up in a world where communication didn't have to happen face to face, right? Most of you born after 2000, you have built friendships primarily through communication that happens without sound at all. Okay. And so for people like me, I was born in the 80s. I remember like the only way to communicate with somebody was through face-to-face communication or by talking on the phone. So I say that to say that we got more practice, and some of you may not be as comfortable. So I think being aware of how you sound, and not just the words you're speaking, but how you speak them. And if you have parents, which we all did, or your grandparents, they all say, watch your tone, or watch how you say that to me. That's because how you say something is just as important as what those words were. So there's a couple of more. Haptics is about touch. Um, what we're communicating with our touch, a firm handshake or an appropriate touch, pat on the back. All of these things are still nonverbal communication. You got to be careful with haptics. It has to do with space as much as touch. It can create too much intimacy if we're not careful. And I think generally, unless it's somebody that you have a friendship with, it's probably safer to reserve the touch, right? Unless you are aware of the situation and the other person is comfortable with a handshake or a pat on the back or a shoulder or something of that nature. Places where family, a church, these things may be more appropriate than, a networking space or work. We just don't ever know how their comfortability level with touch, right? So also last one, and this is not anything on your worksheet, but your personal appearance has whether we like it or not, it's, I understand that a lot of us, we march to our own beat, and that we're not concerned with what other people think about our personal appearance. And while there's some part of that I agree with, we don't ever want to live to impress other people. The reality is that how we appear to other people, it can either increase our credibility or cause it to decrease. Okay. And so this is situational, but if you go to work, if you're in a workplace, then try to look presentable, because that increases your credibility. You're communicating something, even if you're not communicating. Okay. So if you walk down a hallway and you pass somebody and you don't even make eye contact with them, you don't smile at them, you don't wave at them, and you look disheveled, you're communicating something. Okay. We can get really deeply into this. This is some deep water here, but you're always communicating something. It's what humans do, even without speaking anything at all. Your nonverbal communication so often is saying something, even if you're not aware of it. If you go to the checkout at a convenience store and you don't acknowledge the cashier, and maybe you don't acknowledge the cashier because you're thinking about something else, or you're stressed, or whatever it may be, you're communicating something to that cashier, right? And depending on who that cashier is and what kind of day they've had, they may be receiving that communication a certain way as well. All right. So we have to be aware that even when we're saying nothing, we're communicating something. And so sometimes, like a smile, we're going to talk about that in just a second. And let me see if I can go down here somewhere that I had. So there's some universal, I don't think that I have them on here. Yes, Paul Ekman. Oh, we're here, right here. So Paul Ekman, his research is really, really powerful. And the reason his research is so powerful, because he identified, this should be number 8 on your worksheet. Paul Ekman identified basically 7 universal facial expressions. Okay. So when I say universal facial expression, I mean as cultural as communication is, meaning that what is culturally fine in America may not be culturally fine in Russia or China or South Korea. There are 7 different expressions that we make as humans that are identified as the same communication in all cultures, universal cultures, meaning that no matter where I'm at, if I smile at someone, that is being received the same no matter where I'm at. Okay. And so sometimes when we are not aware of our own communication, we can do small, simple things like the cashier, like at the cashier at the checkout place. We can smile or we can say something, hey, how are you? Simple things of that nature, but a smile may sometimes suffice. So the 7 universal facial expressions are happiness, sadness, anger, disgust, fear and surprise are kind of similar, right? And then contempt, all right? So those are the 7 universal facial expressions. If you are unsure, if you're somewhere else and you're not sure what to communicate or what your nonverbal cues are communicating, those 7 facial expressions are pretty universal, all right? So let's keep going through here. What else do we have? So this isn't on your worksheet here, but what we're trying to do is reduce essentially our nonverbal communication. We're trying to reduce distance, right? I don't mean just physical distance, but psychological distance. We're trying to create connection with people. That's what we want. All of our communication should be an attempt to create some kind of a connection with somebody else. So what we have to do is realize that communication is very complicated and it's very cultural and it has to do with context. So our goal in every encounter we have should be to reduce emotional and mental, psychological distance with somebody else. I asked my in-person classes this: what is the one moment you feel most loved, most cared for in the context of a relationship or a friendship? And one of the things we kind of all agreed on, it's when someone is fully present with us, when we're speaking to them, when we are sharing with them, and they are fully present, making eye contact with us, listening fully to what we are saying. And we're not distracted by other things. We are fully there, being intentional about our presence, not for our own benefit, but because the person that we're with is speaking to us and we want to make them feel seen and heard, which makes them feel loved and cared for. So even when you're not speaking, even when somebody else is communicating to you, the most powerful thing you can do in response is maintain eye contact with them, maintain presence with them. And that communicates so many valuable things. It creates intimacy. It erases psychological distance. It makes people feel valued just by you paying attention to them, just by you listening closely and maintaining eye contact with them as they're speaking and expressing themselves and sharing their heart. That is I would say maintaining eye contact as someone's speaking to you is the deepest, most powerful form of communication because you're letting them know you are important. I hear you. I see you. This moment is valuable to me because I see that it's valuable to you. So what we want to do is we want to create intimacy in all forms of our communication. Open gestures, our bodies open, smiling, maintaining eye contact, sometimes making little noises, as somebody's speaking, just to let them know that we are here. So I want to really encourage you guys in all forms of communication to be fully present. Put your phone away. Don't look at your watch. Something as small as looking at your watch while somebody is speaking to you can make them feel less important. And it may be a subconscious feeling, but it does. Or if you pick up your phone to look at something, it makes them feel like, okay, whatever's happening there is more important. That's what's happening with me right now as I'm sharing. So just wanted to kind of sidetrack there to let you know that a powerful form of communication is being fully present as someone else is communicating with you. The last 2 things that we're talking about on the worksheet, on the lecture, are more interesting to me. Amy Cuddy did some research on power poses. And what she found was that when people stand up straight and kind of spread their legs a little bit before they go out and speak to somebody, maybe for 2 minutes, you just stand up and you hold your shoulders back, you stand tall, and you hold a power stance for just a couple of minutes before you go out and communicate with people, that it increases your testosterone, which means that your confidence level goes up, and that it decreases your cortisol, which is a stress-related hormone. So you get more confident and you feel less stressed by just holding a strong, open stance for a couple of minutes. I thought that was really interesting and really neat. And anytime I am speaking someplace outside of the campus, I try to kind of just go outside for a couple of minutes and hold a really strong stance and do some self-affirmations, do a few prayers. And I do feel like it absolutely increases my confidence and lowers my stress. The last thing is the chameleon effect. It's some research in the late 90s that I think we all can relate to. This is something that happens on a subconscious level. People naturally begin to mimic each other when they're speaking. Okay. That's why if you have a really good friend or a group of friends, you guys probably sound alike. You probably communicate a lot alike when you're all together. Or when maybe you communicate one way when you're by yourself, but when you get with your family members or a friend or a significant other, you begin to communicate a different way. It's because people influence each other. We begin to mimic each other and how we communicate. It's called the chameleon effect. We become what other people are to make them more comfortable. This is a really, really interesting and cool kind of a subconscious mechanism of our communication, our cognitive way of connecting with people, is that we become more like them in order to create some credibility and create some comfortability as well. So here's what I want you to remember about your nonverbal communication. Even if you are saying nothing, and sometimes because you're saying nothing, you are communicating something, okay? So your silence isn't always better. Be aware of what your face is saying when you're walking through a hallway. Be aware of how you're carrying yourself. Be aware of the space you're creating between you and the people you're speaking to. Be aware of how you're saying certain things, okay? So I think just being more aware. If you are somebody who values kindness and you want people to feel loved in your presence, you want people to feel comfortable in your presence, then you're going to have to be intentional about establishing a certain way of nonverbal communication. And in the beginning, it might feel unnatural, or it might feel like a little overwhelming having to think so deeply about every type of nonverbal cue you're putting out there. But I really believe, like anything, that once you begin to practice some really positive nonverbal forms of communication, what your face is, how you're holding yourself, how you're holding your smile, how you're nodding at people or saying hello, or what kind of space you're creating, all of these things will become second nature. And I think that's why I think we all know somebody like this, somebody who is just so kind at all times. And even if they're not saying much, even if they walk by and just smile at us and look genuinely happy to see us, we want to be that person, all right? We want to make people feel good about themselves. We want to make people feel loved and seen. And ultimately, all of our communication, we want to leave people better than when we found them, all right? We want to leave them encouraged and leave them feeling upbeat, and at least momentarily see a little bit of light. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you next week.